Welcome to the Surviving Siblings podcast. I'm your host, Maya Roffler. As a surviving sibling myself, I knew that I wanted to share my story, my brother's story. I lost my brother to a homicide in November 2016, and after going through this experience, I knew that I wanted to share my story and his story. And now it's your turn to share your stories.
Today, I have, of course, another incredible surviving sibling with me. I have Val with me today, who is going to share about her brother and losing her brother almost 4 years ago. But really crazy thing that happened here, guys. Her brother has the same name as my brother. Okay. Her brother is Andreas. And you are probably the first person, Val, that I have met or has applied to be on this show that has a brother named Andreas. So,
Mhm.
welcome to the show. We already have
Thank
a deep
you.
connection.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't
Tell
know that I've ever met another Andreas either, so that's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, funny story before we get into it, guys. So just to share this with you, Val, and everyone who cares about names, because I think it's kind of cool. No one else that's applied to be on the show has had the name Andreas. So that was crazy. And then you reached out to me. So I was like, this is a sign. Like, we have to connect. And we've never shared the type of loss you're going to share today, too, which is perfect for our show. But more importantly, yes, I think there's a lot in a name. And one of the first times I've known Andreas is kind of like in the public eye, but like never like met them. And I was on an anniversary trip and I was really struggling. This was a couple years ago. And it was because it was around my birthday time. And I was really, and we had the same birthday, my brother and I. And I was just like, I kind of like need a sign. And the server came up. I was in Mexico. And guess what his name was?
Ah, that is so perfect.
Yep. And I was freaking out. And my husband at the time was like, oh my gosh, this is so crazy. She's been really like down and sad today. And I'm like, yep. And so Andreas was our server. And I just wanted to stay at that like bar and restaurant all night. And we kind of did and hung out with him. So it was pretty cool. So
That's
take us
awesome.
back in time, Val, and tell us a little bit about you and Andreas. Tell us about your family. Before we hit record, you were telling us that you guys have an Italian background. That's where these kind of
Yes.
names kind of came from. But tell us a little bit about you guys. Did you have other siblings? What was your family dynamic? Kind of tell us what it was like growing up together.
Yeah, so Andy was my only sibling. He's 2 years younger than me, and I feel like we got a really unique opportunity to grow up together because there was really only 1 year ever at a time that we weren't in the same school. We did a lot of the same activities, and we were always there to support. I mean, obviously, as siblings, you have your your times where you're getting into it and you hate each other, but because we were so close in age, I just feel like we went through a lot of life together and we hit a lot of milestones together. My parents were really great about keeping us involved, teaching us how to love one another because that relationship is not a relationship you share with anyone else. And we went on family trips every year. We learned how to ski together. We would drive to school together. We would see each other in the hallways. So it was just, I don't feel like I really appreciated our relationship at the time, of course, but it was just really cool that we weren't exactly the same age, but we definitely spent a lot of time creating the same memories. And when you're not hanging out with friends like that he was my friend, hanging out in the basement, playing Wii, like just, hanging out. I have really, really terrible photo shoots that we took in the basement
Oh
together, and
gosh.
I
Yes.
mean, it's fun and hard at the same time because there are so many memories that we only shared together, and so I can tell other people about them, but there's no one to really reminisce about those memories together, but I still hold them very close to my heart, and I'm very grateful for them.
Yeah, I think, oh my God, that makes me laugh so much because I remember like my siblings and I doing that kind of stuff too, like shooting like music videos and taking
Yes.
like picture and like, oh God, all that stuff. And like, you can't like, you can, like you said so perfectly, you can tell other people about it. and you can remember it. And like, even I'm sure you can tell your parents about it. And they're like, oh, yeah, I remember you guys were playing in the basement or doing whatever, or running around outside. But it's so different to like look back as like an adult and laugh with your sibling. You're like, this was so funny that we did all of this stuff, right?
Yeah.
It's such a special thing. But, like you said too, like you don't always get along perfectly, but having siblings, especially close in age too, when you have them close in age, like they're your first friend, they're your first enemy, they're your first sleepover, they're your first everything in that kind of friendship capacity. So, yeah,
Yeah,
get
and
it.
and spending so much time together as a family as we did, he I mean, even memories where it wasn't just the 2 of us, like, he's in almost all of my memories, and whenever I think about my childhood, I can't think about it without him. Even from young childhood through high school and like, he was there for all of it, and so anything, like, nostalgic or I've always been a very nostalgic person, but nostalgia becomes a very different emotion when that person that you lost was so involved in all of those nostalgic things. So that's difficult to look back on things. And even if it wasn't directly related to him, I'm always thinking about like old computer games or like things that happened in school. Like I am constantly being like, oh, I need to tell Andy about that. And I still can. We just don't get to have a conversation about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I get that too. I do. Tell us a little bit about what life was like. So you're 2 years older than Andy.
Mhm.
Well, that's a hard thing too, right? It's like, yeah, that time that goes on. So you must have gone off to college, right?
Mhm.
So Val, you went off to college, Andy was still in high school. So what was that like when you guys, because you had really been together, and like you said, most of your memories were when you're only 2 years apart, most of your memories are together, right?
Yeah.
So how was that dynamic? Did you go to school close by, or was that difficult? Like, what was that dynamic like?
It was a little tricky. I was 2 hours away, so I wasn't super close, but when my parents came to visit, Andy came with if I went home like, I went home pretty often because 2 hours is enough to be separated from family, but it's not too far that you can't take rides home. So, I did see him a decent amount, and I think, you get wrapped up in the nuances of college. You're like, "Oh my gosh, this is a brand new thing," like, you're making new friends, but I think some of the funnest times that I had were when he came to visit and stay with me, and then it's was very sweet. He probably wouldn't admit it, but my parents think so, so he ended up going to the same school. So he kind of followed in my footsteps, which was even more special because then I got to share this place that I really loved with him, and I got to watch him create similar memories, and he was the next dorm over from me and were the one that I was in my freshman year. So there's only 3 of those buildings on campus, and he happened to be in one of them as well. And so even going in to move him into his dorm, I was like, this is exactly how my freshman experience went. And just watching him make really special friends and relationships. And we didn't see each other all the time. We kind of had one of those relationships where we really didn't talk all the time. We didn't see each other all the time, but no matter what, we were always gonna come back together and have a good time. So we would drive home back and forth from school together and have conversation. Even when we had separate cars, we would drive to and from together and he would kind of follow me. And even though he was my younger brother, he would make sure that like I was safe and no one was messing with me. So it was a little bit tough at first, but I think once I found out that he was going to be following me, I knew okay, so I'm going to have him close by.
Yeah. Oh my god, I'm so glad. I don't know, I just felt like I had to ask you that question, and I had no idea you went to the same school. That's so weird, but
I
cool
yeah, it's
that I
not
knew to ask you that. Like, that's
I
really
know.
cool. I'm like, what made me like, I don't always ask that, but because you guys are so close in age, I was like, what was that dynamic? That's really awesome you went to the same school. I would have loved that if my brother came to the same school as me. We were 3 years apart, but we were actually 4 years apart in school. So we
Mm,
never were
okay.
in the same school. And that's what people are always like, "Well, what?" I was like, "Well, I was young for my grade. My brother was old for his grade." So technically, he was a freshman when my other sister was a senior. So
Mm,
he was a freshman. We were always the same. Like, he was a freshman in high school. I was a freshman in college. So it was like, oh, I
got it.
always would have loved to go through that experience. Oh, God. So I'm a little jealous of you there. That would have been
It
really
was
cool.
It
Yeah.
was really cool. It was very special, and just to kinda know that if I was, like, in the area and that he lived in, like, "Hey, you wanna grab lunch? Like, can I stop by?" So, yeah, it was really special and definitely I mean, it like you said, not something that everybody gets to experience, so I'm always very grateful for that.
If you've lost a sibling, trust me, I know exactly how you feel. I'm Maya. I'm the host of the Surviving Siblings podcast, but I'm also the founder of Surviving Siblings Support. I know that going through this experience is extremely difficult, whether you've lost a brother like me, a sister, or perhaps more than one sibling. Trust me, we know exactly how you feel. So that's why I started our Patreon account. You can click below to find out more about our Patreon. If you join our Patreon group, it'll give you just a little bit of extra support that you need along your journey as a bereaved sibling, or as we like to call it, a surviving sibling. We offer monthly support groups. We offer a free copy of our grief guide that is actually found on Amazon. It's called the Grief Guide for Surviving Siblings. We also offer direct messaging to our community and to me for extra support. And we have incredible events. We have workshops throughout the year that you'll get access to, and you'll also have access to our summit that happens annually. And so much more as you'll connect with a community of surviving siblings that understand the journey of losing a sibling. You can click below to join us today and also check out some additional VIP features that we offer. I hope to see you in the group, and until then, keep on surviving, my surviving siblings.
Yeah, I'm sure even more so today, right? You look back on that and you're like, "Oh, at least, we had that time together." Or like as we start to think,
Right.
we look back and hindsight's always 2020 and all of that fun stuff that we go through and loss. But, you said something too that is interesting how you were like, my brother was younger than me, but he always wanted to make sure that, I was safe. And I think that's just a brother thing because
It
my brother was
is.
3 years younger and like he he had three sisters, right? And so he would this poor guy. He would tease us all like relentlessly, but at the end of the day, he has two older sisters and a younger sister, and I'm the oldest of the four of us. And
Mhm.
he was like that too. He was like, I can mess with my sisters, but no one else can. And
Right, I'm the
it's
only one.
yeah, yeah, and it's interesting because I don't think really age matters with guys, right? Because it's like a
Mhm.
brother, and so they feel you're their sister, and like they're
Right,
protective of you. And so sometimes people are like, "Really, he was like that?" Even though he was, I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, goofy and silly still because he's
of
younger,
course.
but still protective." So yeah, I'm glad to know I'm not the only one who had an Andy in her life that was like that.
So
So
crazy.
yeah, it is crazy. It is crazy. And for those of you listening, so her Andreas went by Andy like consistently, but our little inside nickname for him, my brother, was Andy. It just wasn't as like public that we talked about it. So it was when Val and I connected and she was like, "Yeah, my brother's name is Andreas." And I'm like, "And she calls him Andy. This is so cool. So cool." So tell us a little bit about your brother. So did he graduate college? Because I know he was quite young, and then we'll talk about how you lost him, unfortunately. Oh my gosh. But had he graduated by the time, or because he was 22 when you lost him? So tell
Mhm.
us a little bit about that, and then we'll get into what happened.
Yeah, so I actually do really love telling this story. So 2 weeks before he passed, he had to take a break from school at one point because he had got diagnosed with cancer. Um, and so he took a semester off, which was terrible. It wasn't anything crazy, but, just something that really shook my world, and that is an interesting thing that plays into our story because I had already kind of worried about losing him back then, but then, never would have thought that it would happen a completely different way, but so because of that, even though he was only 2 years younger than me, I was finishing my graduate program the same time that he was graduating from his undergrad, and so we got to walk at the same ceremony, and that was almost 2 weeks before he passed. So, he did get to graduate, he technically wasn't done with his classes, but our university was so gracious and still sent us his diploma, and we have graduation pictures together, and we went out to dinner as a family. So, like, as hard as it is that those 2 things were so close together, I just really could not imagine not having those memories. We kind of finalized that chapter together, and, of course, I wish every single day that we got to start a different chapter, but, like, we did almost get to put to rest that chapter, and I'm so proud of him. Like, if I just to be able to see him get to do that was, like, the coolest thing.
Yeah, of course. Oh my gosh. The layers just keep peeling back on this story. He was diagnosed with cancer. Oh my gosh. So when he was walking in graduation with you, was it in remission? Was he past it? Was he still scared
Yes.
that it was okay? Okay.
It was a
Wow.
really mild form, and it was really easily taken care of, so he was probably, up until everything happened, one of the, like, luckiest invincible people I had ever met. Like, 5, 6 months before he passed, he had appendicitis, and he had to get his appendix taken out. So, like, just this, like, things would happen, and he would survive them, and it was like, how did he even get through that? And he was so I was so proud of him during that time because I know that it affected him a lot, but he handled it so well. And to have to take a semester off and then get back to school, even though he hated school after something like that, it always blows my mind. But to answer your question, yeah, so I think they had taken care of it within like a 6-month time span, which he's so lucky because so many people are not. And so when we graduated, that was all taken care of.
Like, and that just makes the story like even sweeter because you got to like really be in the moment and be together, and also bittersweet because things were looking up, and then 2 weeks later, he gets in this accident. So tell us what was going on. What happened?
Yeah, so Andy loved to longboard. If anybody doesn't know, so like it's just a really long version of a skateboard. And he was so good at it. Him and his friends would stay out till like 3 in the morning and longboard. The craziest part, so we were in a downtown area, hills and, curvy streets. And I have videos from his friends of them just like out under the streetlights longboarding, and so it was something that he was very proficient at. And so it's still a little bit hard to understand even 4 years later, as I'm sure most stories are. But so so we grew up in Michigan. I was on the east side of the state doing a clinical rotation, and he was just enjoying being graduated, and he was supposed to start his last summer class, and I guess he was out with one of his friends on, like, a relatively normal street. I haven't pressed this friend on it just because I just can't imagine having to have been there with him, but from what I have heard, him and his friend were just out longboarding just to get out, get some fresh air. He had plans with his girlfriend later that night, like was just, out for a run. And it was from where now know that it happened, a seemingly very normal road for what he was normally used to. And I guess somehow he misstepped or, maybe hit a crack in the road, but he fell back and hit his head. And from what his friend had mentioned, it wasn't great. And so he had to call an ambulance, and ultimately a few days later he suffered a severe brain injury, and that's how he passed. But I was on the other side of the state, and so my mom got a call from the hospital saying what had happened. I had the day off from my clinical rotation, and I'm at the gym, and I get a frantic call from my mom. Andy hit his head. We have to you have to come home. I was like, What?" And I packed up all of my stuff and met my parents at home, and we flew down the expressway, just, like, begging people to get out of our way, which now I have a lot of grace if I see speeders on the expressway because, obviously, we probably looked like crazy people.
Yep.
But we finally get out there, and his friend who was with him and his girlfriend are in the waiting room, of the hospital, and we still don't really know what's going on because he was over 18. The hospital wasn't able to provide a lot of information for us. We just knew that he was getting some testing done, and we waited a little while, and the neuro ICU doctor came out and asked my parents and I to come into a room with him, and he kind of said, "I'm here to give you Andy's state right now. Do you want to hear all of his injuries, or do you want me to just tell you where things are at?" My mom is a nurse, and being in a healthcare graduate program, I had some idea of maybe what was going on, but he listed this laundry list of injuries that made absolutely no sense to me because he had just fallen off his longboard. Like, it didn't really make any sense. And he ended that list with that Andy didn't have any brainstem reflexes, which are that's the part of your brain that functions for like your vital function. So like heart rate, blood pressure, and things like that. And so those reflexes are tested to see how well that part of the brain is working, and his was not, which just kind of like sunk me. I could see my dad, who has no medical background, not really sure what was, but like obviously knows it's bad. And I don't really remember much after that. I really don't even remember like how we got from there to the room with Andy, but ultimately he was on life support. He never was conscious again. And so we spent 2 days with him in the hospital in the ICU. And then they had to tell us, look, those injuries are unfortunately too bad. And so we decided to take him off life support. And it happened on a Tuesday, and Wednesday night, we kind of said goodbye to him.
Which is so hard. I know. Like, I didn't like, obviously, we lost our siblings in different ways, but I didn't realize that we had, like, that in common. What I think is really difficult is when you have to make that decision. And then I think I just can't imagine, like, especially for you and your mom because you guys have medical backgrounds, and so you're understanding this. So you're hearing all of these injuries. I mean, it must just been so jarring to just sit there and go through all of this and hear this because I know in my experience, even though I lost my brother in a different way, it was just like you find out, you get a call, and then you're just like, there's no hope for them. Like it's so our stories are very similar. It was very, very
Right.
fast, and we spent almost 3 days in the hospital with my brother. I believe it was three days, yeah, because my dad had to come from Africa, which I've shared on the first season of the show, and so that's the only reason we kept him on life support. They couldn't operate on
Right.
him. Very similar in that sense,
Yeah.
inoperable, right? There was nothing. That's kind of what they were telling you, right, Val?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But you are sharing how you were so surprised by the laundry list of injuries for this because you're understanding it, your mom's definitely understanding it. So, did they confirm this was all from the skateboarding accident? Was it just that bad of a fall, or are you feeling like you're always gonna have questions around that? Where are you with that, and what did you find out?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was actually just talking to a friend about this the other day. We have answers that we feel like we're okay with. I'm really never going to press his friend about it because I can envision what it was like, and I don't want him. I'm sure he relives that every single day. And so to
Right.
make him kind of re-explain that to us, I don't necessarily feel the need to, but they did tell us that it all came from he must have fallen in a way because from his head down, he had no scratches, but he had injuries to his lungs. He had multiple facial fractures. He had injuries to the arteries from his neck up to his brain, which is ultimately what led to a lot of swelling and lack of blood flow to that part of the brain that was really kind of, I think, the most severe. But I still kind of occasionally think I don't quite understand because we had just gone through a semester in school talking about neurologic injuries and brain injuries. And I remember us talking about, you know, car accidents and like really bad accidents where I don't remember us mentioning that many injuries. And so for me, I don't have the full answer, and I don't know that I ever will. But yeah, it was really hard. I felt very confused. I don't remember much of it, but I remember listening to the doctor and just being so confused. Like, why is he still going? Why is he still meant? And then in the middle of it, like, well, wait, how did his lung? And then hold on a sec, that was injured, and like it just and I think a lot of it, he had a lot of swelling, which was very apparent in the hospital, which was tough. It's an image you never get out of your head.
I totally
And
relate. Yep, yep. Mhm.
so, to answer your question, I don't know that we have a full answer. I don't know that anyone really truly described what they thought medically necessarily. We just knew that they were ultimately trying to get the swelling down and then realizing that it was just continuing to worsen. And that, like you said, they couldn't they were originally going to do an operation, and then the swelling got so bad that they didn't think that they could. And then that just they ultimately, so this might be a little bit graphic, so I apologize, but
That's okay, you warned us, share. Yes, yeah.
in that state, they have to do brain death testing,
Mhm.
and they have to go through 2 rounds of that. I was not in the room for the first round. I was there for the second round. We were taught all of those things in school that they were testing for, and then the cause of death was brain death. So once they confirm that second part of the testing, then that's time of death. So we kind of had the decision to take him off life support, but it also partially wasn't our decision because they had called time of death, and that's kind of how it is. And I know that my mom holds a lot of guilt about not pushing harder, that I have to remind her I mean, it makes sense to me that there really wasn't anything that they could do.
Yeah. Yeah, but I understand why your mom would feel that way, and I think it's really great and so wonderful that you can be there for your mom and say, "Look, mom," like, you're that kind of voice of logic, you're the person that was there, obviously your dad as well, and you guys can be like, "Look, you didn't have a choice," because I didn't realize we lost our brothers in different ways, but I did not realize that we had a lot in common in this because it was about
Yeah.
the same time we were in the hospital. I mean, my brother, most of you guys know, my brother was shot, and it was in his head, right, of course, so there was no way they could operate the way it was lodged, there was no way,
Right.
they did the same thing, they gave a time of death even though he was still on life support.
Mhm.
um I mean, they were just like we were really just keeping him on life support so my dad could say goodbye so that we
Right.
had time and, so that he could be an organ donor, right? Like, those were the reasons why.
Right.
So, I connect with you on that, but you do like, it plays tricks on you. So I connect with your mom too because you do and I'm sure you go through this too, but you can just it's always easier to be logical to another person than to yourself. So, like, when you see your
Correct.
mom saying that, isn't it easier for you to be like, "But mom, that you had
Right.
no
Like,
choice," right?
and
Yeah.
yeah, without having to go through all of the reasons why. And I think she carries the most guilt because she was the one that was having to make the decisions, because my dad was there, but he just really didn't know what was happening. And so I always hate that it fell on my mom, and I tried to help her make those decisions as best as possible, but I'm sure like, those it just all happens it's like such a blur. And then once it's done, you look back and you're like, "Well, could these decisions have been changed? Like, was there anything that we could have pushed for?" But ultimately, I mean, in both cases, it just kind of ends how it is,
Yes.
and you almost don't wanna drag that out any longer. And I'm
Mhm.
sure I'm sure it was hard for you guys to have to wait for your dad to come in and just sitting and kind of waiting for the inevitable, which is a little bit of what I felt around that second day when they started to give us more information. And you don't want to lose hope, but sometimes it's hard not to.
Yeah. I mean, it's and there's I mean, because there at the end of the day, there's medical facts, right?
Right.
Like, in your story very much, in my story very much, and you as much shock as you're in and as much as this is a whirlwind, your brain can start to process those things, and you're like, "Okay, there is really nothing we can do," but just like what your mom has experienced, I'm sure you've experienced this, I'm sure your dad's experienced this, where
Yeah,
you're like, "But could we have," because hindsight's 2020. It's the same for a
absolutely,
reason, right? And, like, it's
absolutely.
also a lot easier as you move away from this, right? And you're not in a hospital and you're not to look back and be like, "If I just stayed one more day," or if I just you start to kind of
Right.
it's a part of the grieving process, to be honest. I mean, that's what we talk
Absolutely.
about here.
Yeah,
It's a part of that.
absolutely. I mean, you can't help but run through the scenario a million times.
Mhm.
And even no matter how long it gets, you might not think about it as frequently, but it still comes back. And it's so easy to let your mind wander into the what ifs, but you miss your sibling or your loved one, and you kind of just have to go through the process of there's nothing that we can do now, and I know that he's in a place where I will see him again. Um and until then, like he lived his best life. I was telling this to my friend the other day. I mean, obviously, it wasn't fair for him to die at 22, but I think that if I was able to talk to him, he would say, "Well, yeah, that really freaking sucks, but like I I fell in love. I had amazing friends. I lived my life freely, and I think that he would have been semi okay with how things happen." So I have to remind myself, you got to see him do a lot, and there's a lot of things you won't get to see him do, but you really, I mean, I cherish what I got to see him accomplish.
I feel like you're so wise beyond your grief years, Val, which is why you came on the show. Because it's not, sometimes it takes people a while, right, to kind of get to where you are with it. And that's why a big message of our show, as you know, and everybody listening, it's everybody has their own timeline, right? I
Mhm.
mean, you're just shy of 4 years. And I feel like, I mean, you've got a lifetime of grief that you're going to experience. You're going to experience highs and lows for sure. But I really love what you just shared because it was something I was wanting to consciously do right away, and I even wrote it in my brother's eulogy. I said it's so weird, we have so many
I know.
commonalities in our story. I said this in his eulogy because I wrote it, of course I did, of course I had to write and talk, you know me, I gotta talk. So, I one thing I remember just pouring down tears and I'm writing this and I was like, "You know what, guys," and this makes me emotional. I said, you know, I don't I actually read it on the show. So if you guys have listened to season 1, you've listened to it. But in short, I said, I don't want to focus today on the things that like he didn't get to do. I want to talk about the things he did do. And I talked about his girlfriend. I talked about how he was in love too. So it was so, and how I was grateful for her. She was there, obviously. And, it's I talked about all the things he had done in his life, and my brother was older than your brother, so I can't even imagine 22. It's so young. Like, you have their whole life ahead of them. But, my brother was 27. He hadn't gotten married yet. He hadn't really
Still
got
so
his
young.
career. Yeah, exactly. But I so connected with you when you gave that perspective because I really it took me years until I started believing that perspective. That was the difference. So I'm grateful, and it's so interesting because when I recorded the first season and I read that, it like helped me shift more again into that
Yeah.
kind of mindset because I'd been so angry for so many years. And so
Right.
I just really commend you for where you
Thank
are,
you.
and I think it's really inspiring for everybody listening. Go back just a little bit if you don't mind, Val,
Yeah.
and share with us what was it like after you guys walked out of the hospital? Because I that is such a big moment, and like how did you guys operate now as not a foursome, you're now the three musketeers kind of working through this. Like how I mean, that's so tough. I'm sure you guys had a funeral or a celebration of life or something, and like what was that like navigating? I mean, that's your whole life changed in a second, and it's tough.
Yeah. That is a great question because it's such a weird time to look back on. So I think it was around 8 o'clock ish that they called his time of death. And so the staff was very gracious, and they kind of said, "Look, we're gonna turn the machines off so you don't hear anything. Like, we'll let you know once he has passed, but like please just sit with him And that would that was such it was such a weird feeling because I just remember thinking, like, "We're just leaving him here." Like, how can we walk out without? Because you don't necessarily think going into it, obviously, that you're gonna walk out without this person, and I remember, like, asking the nurse, like, "Please take care of him," and then it was just like we left.
Mhm.
We walked out of the hospital. Even though I was living on the east side of the state at the time, I still had an apartment less than 10 minutes down the road from the hospital. And unfortunate fortunately, but unfortunately, so I lived in a duplex, so I had half of the house, and our neighbors had just recently moved out, and I convinced Andy and his girlfriend to move in.
Oh my gosh.
Um, so a week prior, my mom had come up to move Andy and his girlfriend in, and then a week later, we were moving their stuff out, but we went and stayed at my apartment that night, and then we woke up, and my parents were already calling people and, like in between leaving the hospital and, going to my apartment, we all look at each other and we're like, "We haven't eaten anything." And this was the most bizarre thing. We went to McDonald's and the person's asking us like, "Oh, how are you? Like, what can we get?" And we're just like, "What?" I don't honestly really know how to describe it. It was just this weird that was probably the first feeling of like, "Oh, life just is continuing and we're in this parallel universe, but we're also still here," kind of thing. But we had to get food. So we got food, and then, like I said, the next morning I woke up and my parents are already calling people, and I just kinda remember being like, "I don't know what I can do." And then I think that afternoon, we went back to the east side of the state, a week later, we had his funeral, and I was in the middle of that's there's just so many, like, layers to this more I talk about it because I still hadn't finished yet. So, I was 2 days into my clinical rotation, and my school was great enough to let me take 2 weeks off, but they said, "Look, we really hate to do this, but if you take more than 2 weeks off, we're gonna have to push back your clinical rotation." So, I had to decide, do I have the capacity to do 18 more weeks of clinicals, or do I wanna push this back? And I think at the time, I'm glad that I made the decision to continue because I was in so much shock at the time that once the grief started to set in, I don't know that I would have gone back. And then
Yeah.
that whole 7-year process of getting to this point would have been for nothing. But I was at a hospital for my clinical rotation, so 2 weeks later, I went back to my rotation at the hospital, which was really hard. And then we after that, I took my board exam, and I just it was weird because obviously there's so many different nuances to grief, and as you're going through this process, looking back, I'm like, "Well, I was in shock for a lot longer than I realized."
Yep.
And then all of a sudden, life continues and I take a month or so off, but then I'm starting a new job and I'm moving to a new place, and like unless you take the time for yourself, life really does not give you a chance to grieve.
Yeah.
But it's very difficult to take time for yourself when life is so fast-paced and things are just flying at you. I think it felt a little bit more for me just because I wasn't in a steady chapter of life at the time.
Yeah, you had so many firsts and new things happening. You're this young woman, like, finally, like, getting into her career after all this school. Like, we all know what that moment is like for us, and it's super chaotic, and everything is new, and you're moving, new place, new job, new, like, new people, new friends. I mean, it's new everything, and you just had like, one of the most constant things in your life is gone. Like, that's hard. It's really,
Yeah,
really hard.
it really sucked. I do think that it's hard to regret any of it because it all things all kind of happen and maybe you're not super intentional about how they happen, but you just you make it through it. And so I am glad that I kind of pushed through. I am, you deal with a little bit of the like after effects if you just push through things. But yeah, it was a lot of new things in life and then trying to also be a new person, which is something that I've had to come to terms with in grief. Like that old self that's not you anymore. That
Yeah.
person doesn't really exist. And so then now also having to grieve myself and grieve all of the people that loved Andy and then also say, okay, well, like, who am I as a person now? I think that's one of the things that not a lot of people realize about grief is that you didn't just lose someone.
Yeah.
You lose a lot of things. You lose yourself, but then it's not just they passed away and you were sad and then life goes on. And I think that I'm glad that people who have never lost anybody don't know that.
Mhm.
Like, I would really prefer that people don't know that. But unless you've experienced it, you just don't really know all of the in-depth things that go into grief.
Very true and very well said, Val. And I think, I mean, 100% I agree with you, but I think a lot of people on the outside don't understand that's why people grieve for life because there's new things that come up as you start moving through the grief process. And then in addition to that, you're just rediscovering yourself. So I would ask you, Val, how do you think you've changed after loss? Like, what is, because when people ask me that question at first, I was like, I don't know how to say that. But almost 10 years
Right.
into this, I know how it's changed me. And
Yeah.
there's things for better or for worse, right? Like that it
Right.
changed me into. And I tend to just try to embrace like the better things, right? Like it's made me much more empathetic. It made me a little bit softer. I'm a business gal, so I mean, I'm always going to be a little hardcore, but it definitely made me softer, more empathetic. And I could go on and on. So I'm curious about your like how do you cuz 4 years into this, you already recognize that this has shifted you as a person, it changed you. So what are the things that you would say you notice the most about this new version of yourself?
I think this timing of me coming on this is really perfect in a lot of ways, but I have just gotten the time to fully start to reflect on things. And so there are a lot of things that I realized throughout the last 4 years, but I just wasn't able to put words to. I definitely I've always been I like to consider myself an empathetic person, but I now just have this extra level of empathy, which is really cool because I feel like the best thing that has come out of it is that I now know how to sit with others, which I did not know before. And I feel very honored to be able to ask questions that grievers don't get asked and like sit in uncomfortable situations, which most people won't do because nobody likes to be uncomfortable and sad. Like that sucks. But it's interesting that you said it made you softer because in a way I feel like it made me harder.
Mhm. And that can
I
happen too.
guess
Totally. Mhm.
which sucked at first because I had lived 25 years of my life
Mhm.
being this, like, soft, timid, anxious person, and I always used to tell people that Andy and I looked alike, but if we didn't look alike, you had no idea that we were siblings because we were so drastically different. I was definitely the older child, type A, like, anxious and, like, just needed everything to be perfect, and he was so go with the flow, like, just so, "Everything's gonna work out." His favorite line, and I have it tattooed on my arm now, is, "I'll figure it out." My mom would be like, "Andy, what about the" "I'll figure it out." And he did. Like, most things he just figured out because he was able to see life in a different way because he wasn't clouded with anxiety,
Mhm.
and I it seems really cheesy, but I do feel like in a way I took that on from him. Not completely. I still am definitely not as good at it as he was, but I feel like I have subconsciously adopted a little bit of his go with the flow attitude. And truthfully, nothing really matters or nothing is as bad as your loss.
Yeah.
So it almost feels in a sense like things matter less just because I've been through something terrible, which has been helpful for me as a person to kind of like live and let go, and that things just aren't as big to me anymore. Like important things are obviously, but those little things and the little hard parts of life, they just don't seem as dramatic, which I do
Yeah.
feel like has helped me. So I think those are kind of the biggest ways that I notice a difference in myself.
Those are great, and so many of our siblings that listen are have oldest daughter syndrome too, and so I totally get that. I love that you have that tattooed on you. I'll figure it out. My brother was like that too. He was kind of just like what was the tagline he would always say it and, like, sometimes I'll say it because I that has changed me too in the
Mhm.
same way. I still struggle with anxiety, it's just I'm type A, it is what it is. But I'm anxious about things that actually matter, like, back in the
Right.
day before I went through this, I used to be like I'm like, "Why was I anxious about what color I was wearing that day?" Or, like, stupid
Yes.
stuff, like, stupid stuff. It's still who I am, okay? I still have to consciously work on it, I totally get that,
Yes.
Val, and many of you guys listening go through this too, but it does put a nice perspective on it, and so but I love how your brother would say, I'll figure it out. My brother used to be like, "Oh, don't worry, I got it," or "Don't" that was his
Yeah.
thing. He'd be like, "Don't worry, I got it." So if I ever slip up and say that, because again, I feel more like I can just handle anything, like you
Yeah.
mentioned, I'll say that to my dad sometimes, and my dad will be like, "Oh god." I'm like, "Oh, sorry, I sound like Andreas. I actually got it though. Don't worry about it." Because my brother would say that no matter what, and then he would just figure
Right.
it out. It's like an Andy
Yes.
phrase, I guess, you
I
get an
guess
Andy's.
so. Yeah.
I guess so. It's so I'm, like, smiling as you're sharing that. That is so funny. That is so insightful, though, Val. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Okay, so before we let you go, Val, and you share where we can connect with you, share with us anything maybe I didn't ask you.
Yeah. So ultimately, I think the biggest thing that I've learned and I try to tell people is even if you've experienced loss and you're going through your own grieving process, it's still not comfortable to sit with people in their grief because now not only do you have your own grief, but as humans we don't love to be uncomfortable. But the perspective that I gain that I hope other people can take on is that that person is in discomfort all the time, and if you have 5, 10 minutes to sit with somebody in their discomfort and you can go about your day, like that will take some discomfort away from them when they will go to the rest of their days still being sad and missing their loved one. And all you really have to do, I mean, if nothing else, just sit there with them, but it's really easy to ask their name. When people ask Andy's name, it makes my day because you just don't get to talk about that person anymore because there's nothing new to talk about, and you would be surprised just how many people would make their entire world to get to talk about their person. So, if you can just take a couple minutes to sit with someone in their discomfort, like that's a small portion of your day when they have to sit in that all the time, and I think that's really huge because sibling grief is really misunderstood, but grief in total is misunderstood and we don't learn a lot about it.
I could not agree with you more, Val. Absolutely. And I love how you put that too. Like, if it's just uncomfortable for you, just like sit with the person because honestly, like, it's uncomfortable for us all the time. So
Yeah.
I agree with you. Like, and like you said too, like, if the thing is, if you haven't gone through it, you're not going to understand it 100%, but that person grieving doesn't expect you to.
No, not at all.
And I think that's a perspective that I wish more people knew too. And that's why people say really silly things and that makes it more uncomfortable. Just being present and sitting with somebody is really all they need. And like you said, bonus on icing on the cake, ask them the person's name that they lost and ask them to share about them and watch them just change because they will
Yes.
totally transform. And if they're feeling sad that day, it'll bring them a moment of joy, just like you said, like, because being able to talk about that person, especially with someone new, because there's no new stories, like you said, so if you're sharing it, it feels new because you're sharing it with
Yes.
someone new. So
Oh,
I
yeah,
love that advice.
absolutely. Yeah, I love
Yeah.
that.
Val, where can people connect with you? Where are you comfortable with people reaching out? We'll put it in the show notes too.
Yeah, so I started a TikTok page not too long ago. I was kind of somewhat for me, but like if I could reach anybody, that was kind of my goal. So I'm comfortable with anybody DMing me on TikTok. I've had a few people reach out, which truly, if I can help just like one person get through any stage of grief that they're in, I would be more than happy to. So Do you want me to share
Yeah,
my
what's your handle?
TikTok page?
Mhm.
So my TikTok page is Grace in the Mess, but then my at is my name and then 22. So Valerie Lentini 22. And I don't mind that being shared in the caption.
Perfect. Perfect. We'll put that in the show notes. And of course, we'll tag you when your episode comes out so people
Thank
can
you.
find you. And thank you so much for sharing Andy, aka Andreas, with us. I feel like it's really special. I feel really connected to you with that. It's not every day you meet someone that has a brother with the same name as your brother. So thank you for sharing him with us. And thank you for sharing all of your insight. I feel like you just have such a great perspective only 4 years into this. So thank you for being here and sharing.
Yeah, thank you for letting me share about him, and it's been an honor to be able to talk with you.
Oh, thank you, Val.
Thank you so much for listening to the Surviving Siblings podcast. If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did creating it for you, then share it on your chosen social media platform. And don't forget to tag us at Surviving Siblings Podcast so that more surviving siblings can find us. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. And don't forget to follow us on all social media platforms. We're on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Surviving Siblings Podcast. All links can be found in the show notes, so be sure to check those out too. Thank you again for the support. Until the next episode, keep on surviving, my surviving siblings.